Welcome to Massive Signals, where we explore the companies defining the next wave of deep tech and the inflection points that took them from lab to market. I'm David Mandel, joined by my co-founder Ari Newman. Each episode, we go deep with founders, investors, and researchers driving breakthroughs in energy, quantum, AI, defense, and the new space economy. This is Massive Signals.
Most VCs come from finance. Today's guest came from a biophysics lab. Jon Bronson did his PhD at Columbia building AI tools to analyze biochemistry experiments, then Boston Consulting Group, then solar infrastructure for D.E. Shaw, then the COO of a health tech startup. And somewhere in all of that, he saw something most investors completely missed. In 2020, before dual-use deep tech was even a category, Jon co-founded J2 Ventures. 3 oversubscribed funds later, the largest, a $250 million fund, the firm has a compelling portfolio, including Illyria, Apex Space, and NameTag. And they have a unique advantage. J2-backed companies raise $2 in non-dilutive government funding for every dollar J2 invests. That's serious leverage. Jon, welcome to Massive Signals.
Jon, thanks for joining us today. Let's kind of kick off an easy question, like to ease our guests into it so they feel comfortable before we trap them with really hard questions. But, what's the best way to introduce yourself to our audience and so they get a feel for who you are and what you do?
Thanks, David. So my name is Jon Bronson. I'm one of the co-founders here at J2 Ventures, and we invest at the intersection of deep tech and national security, with the caveat that we don't invest in any guns, weapons, or active offense. So I like to joke we're the defense investors who don't invest in defense. My background is all science and tech originally, did a PhD in chemistry with a lot of focus on applied math and AI. My co-founder has a military background, and then I worked in startups, worked in consulting, and then even in private equity before teaming up and forming J2.
Awesome. So, a lot of VCs that we've interacted with who come from science, eventually, obviously, you have to stop doing the science, right? And you've got a pretty deep science background, built AI tools, PhD, BCG, solar, health tech ops. At what point did you stop thinking of yourself as a scientist? If you have, I don't know, do you still think of yourself as a scientist, or was there like a switching point where you're like, okay, this is different now?
Oh yeah, no, my first week at BCG, somebody introduced me and said, hey, this is Jon. He's really smart. He has a PhD. And I was about to explain what my PhD was in. The other guy, said, well, what's the PhD in? And before I could, the first guy said, who cares, man? It's a PhD. He's just really smart. And so pretty quickly, I figured out once you leave the ivory tower of academia, people don't actually care what you studied. They just sort of view you as a generically smart business person. And so I've kind of taken that mantle since.
Very cool.
Yeah. So question for you, so Alex is from the military and, you're from the science and the world of labs. What's the dynamic with you guys? And I'm so curious, the inside baseball and the partnership between these two totally different worlds.
Yeah. And we had no reason to ever meet to start as well. Because that's the other question, how did you guys actually meet, given that your backgrounds don't overlap in any logical way? And so we were both volunteer ambulance drivers in New York, and shared a experience, driving around Harlem and Morningside Heights, taking people to the hospital about probably 20 years ago now, and just became very good friends. And so over the course of my consulting and being in startups and being in private equity, we followed each other's lives. I officiated his wedding before he deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. And then we came together and realized that we have these very complementary skill sets and different backgrounds that enable us to be effective investors together.
So how does that play out? When you guys are evaluating a company, the complementary aspect, do you guys look at the business or the market or the technology from totally different lenses and bring that together? Or do you have divergent views on where the opportunities are?
Yeah, I think we joke that we fight all the time. And the only times that we invest are when we finally stop fighting and agree that something is valuable, because we have these very different backgrounds. But I think, as a scientist, you're trained to basically filter out all of the noise and filter out what everybody else thinks about something and try to find the intrinsic truth of it, right? Whether it's, what makes up the universe, or whether it's some founder who's trying to sell you on their idea. And there's good and bad of that, right? Like the good of it is you are less likely to fall for, say, a founder who's extremely generous in their vision, but maybe doesn't have the background to follow it up. But the downside is that, venture is very much a team sport, and you actually do need other people to think what your ideas are good and to continue to back them so those companies can grow. Whereas my co-founder, Alex, comes from the military background. He was a human intelligence officer, right? And so the superpower there is really understanding how people think about the world and what they think. And that's also incredibly valuable. But by itself, if all you do is follow hey, this is exciting, this is valuable, other people love it, then you end up chasing things that, could be at the peak of a bubble or don't necessarily have enough content. And so I think when we bring together those two perspectives, it complements really well.
Yeah, that's super similar to Ari and I. Obviously, when we started the firm, right, very complementary skill sets, and we had both started and sold several businesses before. Like, we know the value of having a co-founder that you truly trust implicitly, right? And even though you may argue sometimes, everyone has everyone's best interest in mind. And it seems like you and Alex kind of function that same way. One of the real difficult points for Ari and I in growing Massive was realizing we actually need other people also, right? And kind of growing the firm and bringing on people as we built Massive. Was that a very specific decision point for you guys? Like, oh my God, like, we really seriously need help here. We need other people. And how did you talk through like how to grow the firm that way?
Yeah, I mean, we've always thought that we would grow the firm beyond ourselves. And I think pretty early on, even in our first fund, we expanded the team to another partner, a guy named Matt Goldman, who is both a retired Air Force colonel and a physician with dual appointments at Johns Hopkins and Stanford. He sees patients, I think, 1 weekend a month at Stanford and like 1 weekend a quarter at Johns Hopkins. He's full time with us, but we've always wanted to expand the team. And then we brought on a woman named Christine Kung, who was a Fulbright scholar and was early at Dropbox, and just the best networked person I've ever met in any context, whether it is trying to get in touch with a celebrity, a high net worth individual, the CEO of Northrop Grumman. Somehow she knows all of them. This is crazy. And so far we have sort of just grown organically. These are people that are in our ecosystem. Alex works actually in the military with Matt and sat next to Christine in business school. And we just have been able to grow the team out slowly and methodically. And it's been really, really wonderful.
Awesome. And, one of the things you said when we started, which I think is really important, right? When people talk about defense tech and dual use, right? Like, it's got a certain theme to it and a mindset, especially among LPs. Like, skeptics would say dual use is just a way to make defense investing more palatable for LPs, right? And you're very specific around your approach to this. So, walk us through how you think about what dual use means, and how you kind of position in a world that's kind of overwhelmed when you say dual use defense tech and what people perceive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people who look at dual use really think about the military aspect of dual use. They think, hey, we make rockets and the rocket fuel is also useful for cars or something like that, right? And it's like very much a euphemism for just defense investing, which is certainly having its moment right now. For me, dual use has always been much more about the private sector first, right? In fact, Neil deGrasse Tyson has a great book that came out a few years ago about how all of astrophysics research is basically funded by the military, right? And if you look at historic examples, right, it's everything from like, zippers and backpacks and M&Ms to like companies like, Pixar, that all came out of the military in some way, shape, or form. It's just that the military has an ability to spend on innovative technology in a way that is really unparalleled in any other aspect of the world. And so that's the thing that I get excited about. And especially with my background, right, I was a National Science Foundation fellow in grad school. So getting government funding to do really interesting research was very natural. And then, as we said earlier, I also worked in solar development. And that was a field where the federal government, not the military specifically, but had come in and really sort of tried to warp the economics of an industry to encourage its growth. And just succeeded wildly, right? And so this idea of, hey, when the government or the military or whichever entity wants to spend a lot of money in non-dilutive capital, wants to push society in some direction, it's really exciting to see what can happen.
As you were talking about that, it made me realize, like, I think one of the underappreciated aspects of what we're doing in the new space economy is the same, which is all of this innovation that we've, even all the way back to the 60s, the beginning of the space race. Sometimes it takes the government or research to sort of drive what ends up in the consumer space, right? Right. The joke was that we had to feed astronauts and somehow we figured out freeze drying later.
Right. So, exactly. Yeah. But even when you look at these big industries too, that like space itself, right, was entirely a government enterprise for probably close to 40 years. before, really SpaceX came along and just sort of totally privatized it. The chip industry was also Air Force and NASA before it became, computers. In fact, even the whole computer industry was essentially initially funded by the NSA and the military. And then when the NSA needed newer, better computers, IBM said, well, what are we going to do with these old generation computers? Maybe we can go sell them in the private sector. And so you have this amazing long history of really all of these technologies actually starting as military technologies and then coming into our lives.
And let's go a little deeper on the dual use thing, right? So have you seen examples where the military application and the commercial application are totally divergent, and the company is just saying they're dual use because it sounds better, but really like you look at the business and you're like, there's no way.
Oh yeah. And I think dual use can also be a euphemism for I tried to sell in the private sector and I failed. And so I will therefore go send, like a lot of dual use companies make a ton of sense, right? If you're talking about, a quantum computer that eventually is going to branch out into the private sector. But you also see a ton of companies that are like, hey, we were selling shoes on the internet, but it'd be really exciting is selling shoes to army soldiers. And you'd be like, I don't think that's exactly what happened to your business. So that does very frequently happen. I think and then there are, in the defense first industries, you do see a lot of people trying to massage things to be dual use that are not necessarily dual use at all. And that's pretty common. But I think what's amazing is actually how many technologies are truly dual use in nature. And that would just really surprise you.
Yep. I mean, I think maybe a good example, if you're listening and you're like, what does all this dual use stuff mean? Probably a good recent example is how Starlink is running a parallel secure military network in low Earth orbit. We use Starlink, and there's another version of it that is used specifically for military applications that the consumers don't have access to. Same underlying technology, same infrastructure, same team, two different paths.
Yep. Yeah, you see that all the time. Starlink is a great example. They're really pretty much anything that's in telecom, I think, probably has some kind of dual application, and a lot of things that are in cybersecurity or even actually healthcare. I think that's the one that always surprises me, that the military is so bullish on. Well, it's not surprising the military cares a lot about their soldiers and their soldiers' health, but it can be surprising that the military can be so supportive of health tech companies, because to your point, when people think about dual use, they really do think about, smart weapons, or at least, autonomous ships or autonomous drones, not, hey, how do I make sure that all of our soldiers, wake up feeling refreshed and ready for a battle or whatever else they need to do that day.
We hear the term dual use. Obviously, you guys have gotten a very focused on a specific approach to theme, which is awesome, right? And, similar to Ari and I around deep tech, but like similar to deep tech, dual use is kind of like all the rage now, right? Like every firm you talk to now is either deep tech or defense tech or dual use, right? But I know we both started our firms in 2020 when SaaS was still a big thing, right? And not everybody knew what dual use in defense tech was, and not everybody knew what deep tech really meant. Like, in hindsight, do you think were you early? Was it a struggle early on being defense dual use focused, or do you think you got the timing just right? Or like, give us your, we definitely took a lot of time for us to get LPs and investors to understand what we were doing.
Yeah, I think we were, from a storytelling perspective, a little bit early. I still remember when we raised our first fund in 2020, 2021, the most common question that we would get from potential LPs was, well, we all know there's never going to be another war again. So why is this thesis even relevant? And I know, right? So it's almost impossible to think about now.
Hold on. Somebody actually said that?
Everybody actually said that.
I believe it.
I believe it. It's so hard to remember that 6 years ago, and put aside the fact that we actually were at war in the Middle East,
right.
In Afghanistan, put that aside for a moment. But people in their mindset were like, hey, we haven't really fought a real enemy since, the USSR. And that was like 30 years ago. So, that's like my parents or grandparents did, but we're just done. It's never going to happen again. And that was actually like a big thing we'd have to explain. It's like, well, our thesis doesn't actually require going to war. It's just that the military wants to spend money on things that you would buy anyway. From a actual fundamentals perspective, though, I think our timing was great. I mean, the Defense Innovation Unit, which a lot of people say would really kick off the whole dual use craze, was created in 2015. There was the outgrowth of something called the Third Offset Strategy in 2014, where basically the military, to its credit, said, "Hey, I know you don't think there's going to be another war again, but China is not giving up on this Taiwan thing, and Russia is down but not out, and they might do something crazy like invade another country one day." And we kind of have forgotten how to work in that public-private partnership and build the next generation of autonomy or hypersonics or cyber defense. And so the military in 2015 actually did stand up this group. If you look at early stage startup spending, it really, from the military, it really started to take off around 2015 and went from, depending on your benchmark of what counts as spending on startups, call it around zero per year to around like $30 billion a year now in that time period. And my co-founder Alex was one of the early members of the Defense Innovation Unit. So we understood that this was all going on, and the groundwork was actually being laid for the growth in this whole industry.
Yeah, we could echo the feelings, right? Oh, space isn't really a thing, and who cares about GPS denied technologies, right? It's like
you don't miss it till you don't have it, like most things. But yeah, it's there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on in space. I think space is interesting too, because there's this whole space ecosystem for space sake, and who knows, maybe we'll colonize the moon or Mars like Elon Musk is talking about. But really, most of it is actually like, hey, I'm just trying to get to work, and I need to know whether I'm going to turn right or left, and that's only possible because there's satellites in the air.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole other conversation about GPS radio-based vulnerability. That'll be another session for another day, I think. But it's a big thing that we're focused on. We actually just put up a post about quantum yesterday that speaks to that also. So I have a quick question for you before we jump into the next section. I keep seeing this shiny shovel behind you. There's got to be a story there. So what's going on?
It's from my solar developer days. So we built a very large, like 300 megawatt project in Michigan, gives power to Ann Arbor. And if you build a large enough project, they give you a shovel at the end. So I decided to keep mine.
I'm taking my shovel and I'm going home.
Exactly.
So solar's
I've never actually put it in the ground for what it's worth, but
that's why it's shiny.
That's why it's shiny.
I mean, look, solar is easy to understand. Like we've lived with it for a long time. In defense, dual use, deep tech, where this realm that we're all in, sometimes these ideas and the technologies are really nuanced. What happens when you meet a founder that it might be brilliant technically, but cannot explain their product or the pain that it solves? Do you walk? Do you dig in? Like, how do you react to that?
So most of the time we walk, right? And to the earlier conversation, like ultimately these are not just technologies; they're businesses. And if you can't explain what you're doing, then you can't sell it. And if you can't sell it, then you're not a business. But sometimes the technology is so powerful and so transformative that rather than walk away, we say, hey, is there actually a good salesperson who can supplement you, who can be a CEO and you can move into the CTO seat, or a head of business development and you can continue to build the thing that you're building, but you don't necessarily have to be the salesperson in chief. And so for a handful of technologies, we've actually been involved in that process as well.
I have like an inverse ratio rule. The longer it takes to explain the thing that you're trying to do, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to sell it.
Yeah. And most of your customers are not going to have incredibly long attention spans. I think that's actually the most important thing that founders don't realize, especially founders that come from these PhD backgrounds where it's like, hey, I built this amazing thing and I just spent the last 8 years of my life building it. And let me tell you about every step of the way. And on the other side of the table, it's some person who may care deeply about the mission, but may have just a high school degree, right? And that person needs to understand from a business perspective or a requirements perspective why it matters. And so, it kind of gets back to your question about when did I stop thinking about myself as a scientist? Like the sooner you get into that mindset of nobody actually cares what you did, they just care what the technology can do, then you can actually start to sell things and it can start to take off.
Do you guys find yourselves drawn to the big idea companies or the not obvious stuff in the weeds or infrastructure that everyone else misses?
Yeah, I think that, and ideally you find something that's both, right? I think there are some technologies that are both really big ideas and people don't see them until, or at least you get a first look at them. And those are the most exciting opportunities on our side. So, whether it's, transformative space lasers or, coding tools that are required for regulated industries, there's some really, really exciting opportunities that I think are both big, but kind of esoteric and therefore make the best investments in our perspective.
Yeah, I'll say it's kind of a corollary to that. I'm a psychology major undergrad, right? And I find myself in rooms now where I'm the only one in the room without two PhDs, right? And it can be really intimidating and scary, but super exciting, right? And energizing at the same time, right? Like getting to work with these incredibly talented scientists and people doing like literally earth-changing technologies and solutions. Like you've got a little more of a technical and science background, but do you ever find like you're really intimidated by some of the companies or people or technologies that you're talking about? And like, if you are, but I feel like, how do you work through that, the deep technology part of how you guys filter and source and make decisions?
I'm frequently in awe of the intellectual firepower on the other side of the table. And it's just really fun to be around, right? Like I think it's like, a former athlete going back to the university and like watching the football team practice or something. And but in terms of being intimidated, if they can't explain to me, I feel like as far as investors go, I am on the extreme end of technical. So if I am lost, then everybody else who could possibly fund them is definitely lost. So that's
you got time. You got time to do the deal because no one's
right. So so in that sense, it's less about being intimidated and more, I think, back to your earlier question of, can you invest in somebody if they're not articulate enough? And so that's really kind of what we think about.
Yeah, I mean, that is the endless tension in this industry, which is you can fall in love with the science or the market or even the founder, but finding that formula where they can articulate it, the science is sound, and the market actually truly needs it. Like just because someone did a PhD thesis on a thing because it was an interesting problem to explore doesn't mean that idea needs venture funding. And
definitely.
Right? Like we especially in deep tech, you just see this tension all of the time. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest failure modes of startups is they make something that's just incrementally better, and especially in deep tech because it tends to be part of a more complicated system. Yeah, if you want Lockheed to redesign their entire fighter jet because your jet engine is like 2% faster, like it's just not going to happen, right? And so people frequently run into that problem in my experience. And then there's plenty of academics who make stuff that just seems really, really exciting. But then when you actually dig down to who's going to buy it, there's really no market for whatever they're looking for.
Right. You mean the ceramic polymer coating for the sealed bearings inside of the turbine that reduce the friction that create a slight amount of efficiency gain?
Sounds like a totally random example that you pulled out of nowhere.
Totally random. So to stick with the thing, let's shift trajectories a bit and kind of talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that you guys talk about and specialize at J2. So, one of the things you talk about is your ability to help with and provide non-dilutive funding to a lot of your portcos. Obviously, with Alex coming from DIU, you've got a lot of connections. You understand how the money flows at DOW. So talk to us a little bit, like how do you help specific companies with non-dilutive funding, and how do you leverage that in real time? Like what does it actually take to help a company with that? Because that could be like really one of the key win-lose binaries in the future of a company.
Absolutely. And there's a whole range of companies. So we have some companies that never thought they would work with the government at all. And then we have some companies that start as, hey, defense first, and we want to just have help expanding. And so it can be a very different relationship. But most of it is really, I think when you step back and people talk about military funding and the Department of War, like it kind of is treated like a monolithic entity, right? People say, hey, I'm going to the military for funding, like, I'm going to the store to buy eggs. And it's like, there's actually something like close to 100 innovation centers scattered throughout the military. And some of them are extremely well funded, and some of them are extremely prestigious, and some of them are, both, and some of them are neither, right? And so just the ability to say, what are the right doors to knock on and what's the right order to knock on them is hugely, hugely valuable. So that can be a lot of the value add. And then sometimes it's just really saying, hey, have you even thought about, I know that you are a consumer health wearable focused on, women's health. Like we have a company called Lumia that helps with blood flow in your brain. But, like in the Air Force, they also care a lot about blood flow in the brain. And maybe you could, get some money from them too, and then do some really great research there. So it can be something like that, or it can be a company, like our company Code Metal that does verifiable code translation. So I know that code works in one place, I need it to work in another place. And tons and tons of military applications. The founder started with the military background and wanted to really help expand and grow in there, and we can help them navigate that. So it just depends on what the use case is.
A question for you. This comes up all the time with deep tech, and especially with government funding and SBI grants and what have you. How does J2 think about non-dilutive funding? If a company says to you that, hey, we did 5 million this year, and it came from DIU and other non-dilutive sources, like, do you consider that revenue? Do you write it to zero? Like, I'm so curious how you guys approach that.
In general, we don't count it. So to your point, and the problem is it frequently is one-time revenue, or it's lumpy, or it doesn't actually necessarily lead to a customer. And in fact, there's one of the challenges is there are certain whole asset classes that the military will fund in non-dilutive capital that they don't have a mechanism to buy. So the material science is a great example, right? You can get great non-dilutive capital to do material science development for the military, but there is nobody in any branch of the armed service that will just buy the material. They will say, hey, go to Raytheon or Lockheed or whoever it is and see if you can get them to put it into that material. And so that the non-dilutive capital is really doesn't predict any form of revenue. On the other hand, we do actually have some companies where they are such a critical need that a huge portion of their strategy is continuous non-dilutive capital. And there, I think it actually is fair. So companies that are in, PNT, GPS denied environments, right? That is an area where the military has huge need. We have a company that manufactures human blood that, for all kind. I know it's truly remarkable. They're working on getting it to freeze dry as well, and so you can stockpile it and do things like put it on the back of every ambulance. And so that's something where if you think about how that would just transform the health of soldiers, the military is extremely excited to fund that and continue to fund that. So there's a lot of range of what we look at.
You've got to basically look through and ask the second, third, and fourth question to get to the answer as to whether that's real, forward-looking, market demand-based revenue, or the company is basically an outsourced lab.
Right. Yeah. And in general, and the real question is, can it lead to additional contracts or additional revenue or not? But usually the right answer is to view it as a validation that somebody in the military cares. It's great that you've extended the runway of the company. That is very meaningful, especially at the early stages. But to think of it as true revenue is usually a mistake.
Awesome. Let's kind of downshift again and talk a little bit about J2. I think we were talking a bit before we started about how there's a lot of parallels between how we started Massive and how you guys started J2, and kind of starting with the SPV process before you actually went into a fund. We know how hard that is, right? We know what it is to smile and dial and try and fill a huge SPV allocation, right? Like we very few people understand how much effort and stress goes into those situations and you've got to act a certain way when the reality is you're both chipping in to buy a sandwich for lunch, right? You're trying to get to a place where everyone's taking you seriously. So were there any points early on when you and Alex were doing this where you literally just looked at each other and said, dude, I don't know if this is going to work?
Amazingly, no. Every one of those SPVs was insanely stressful. And it is true, when you start them, you have no idea how they're going to end. But yeah. I think there was kind of this simultaneous feeling of course this is going to work. And every day, like, there's no way this could possibly work. And just kind of balancing those feelings at the exact same time. But at no point did we look at each other and say, we're just going to throw in the towel and give up. We felt like there was a real need for this. There was a real thesis behind it. And with our kind of personalities, we thought that we could do it. And we just kind of kept putting one foot in front of the other. And we're still putting one foot in front of the other. So
yeah. I'm sure there's some really interesting stories from those early days. Like I said, one evening over whiskey, I'd like to share those. The big dichotomy for me though is always, like you're pitching founders who are going through similar stuff, right, early on, and they're fighting just as hard, if not harder, than the stuff we've gone through. But they perceive the investors as like, oh, we're all good, like we're the rich dudes, right? They don't know how hard work the scenes.
Totally right. Especially like you said in those early days where it's like, hey, what size investment do you want to make? And like the challenge with the SPV is you never actually know, and you just have to guess with confidence and then run around and dial and kind of pray that it all works out. But it's.
We totally know. Like, yeah, we'd like an allocation somewhere between 100K and 10 million. We'll get back to you.
Right.
So here's a question for you. You guys have raised 3 oversubscribed funds. Congrats, by the way. That's pretty epic, especially how difficult the capital formation market is. So what's gotten easier and what's gotten harder?
I think we're very fortunate that our first 2 funds have been doing extremely well, and so just having that track record to get into your third fundraise definitely helps. The fact that people no longer ask us, is there ever going to be a war again, also does actually help quite a bit in our fundraising.
Sad but true.
Kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, in the first go around, we had to convince everybody that our strategy actually didn't depend on going to war. The second time around, everybody said, oh, well, this must be great because we're going to war. At which point we would just kind of smile and nod and be like, oh, yeah, totally. Right. Like this is totally going to just, all these boots on the ground have a huge impact on these next generation edge compute devices. And so
that's great. That's good.
Totally get it. Yeah.
There is a loose correlation, right? Of course, the military's defense, the defense budget has grown by 50% year over year, as opposed to GDP, which grows like 3% year over year. So there is some logic behind that. But the general tailwind of military has definitely helped the fundraising process.
So one of the things we focus on very deeply here at Massive is what we call inflection points, right? So we're inflection point investors. We're not super early. You guys typically invest earlier than we do, right? Like we like to look for early commercial inflection points, and we talk a lot about what were key inflection points, both for people and for companies, right? And so, put you on the spot here. So give me like at least one, maybe 2 key inflection points for you and Alex at J2 as far as building a firm. And then if you could talk about maybe 1 or 2 companies that you watched kind of really hit that inflection point and what that happened, how'd you realize was happening and what happened as a result?
Yeah, I think getting your first company marked up to being a unicorn is a major inflection point. At that point, people start to say, hey, this thing really could work. The other major inflection point, it wasn't with a unicorn, but we did have a company in one of those early SPVs.
Can you be more specific on that? Like, are you comfortable being more specific on like what was the company? What was the timing? What was the conversation?
Yeah, a company was called Illyria. They were originally Google Project Loon, if you remember that, the hot air balloon technology that beamed internet back and forth. And actually it's kind of a crazy story where, Google built this technology, spent hundreds of millions of dollars in R&D. And then they started pivoting towards selling the technology to the military. And right as they were selling this technology to the military, all of the search engineers went on strike because Google had a small face rec project with the military. And this again was back in that 2020 timeframe when we were going to fight a war again, and this would be an unfathomable thing to do. And so Google just decided, as I understand it at least, to just divest everything that was military related and just get rid of it. And so we were able to come into that company as a pre-seed company, even though it had already had this crazy long investment history. And so they've been, they've gotten a number of really successful government contracts. They've been growing very quickly. And so that was our first major markup.
So you guys invested like pre-seed pricing basically, yeah, but got the benefit of Google or mega Google R&D. So the cap table was clean, but the IP moat was there. Yeah. What was the first commercial inflection point? Was it $100 million contract that really set the company on its path? Was there a moment where you started to believe that this could return a fund kind of deal? And what was happening around the company at the time?
Yeah, I mean, they pretty much out of the gate were winning government contracts, and so it was not surprising. A lot of what they do is confidential and classified, so I don't want to go into too many of the details, but they're an extremely successful government contractor, and now starting to look at some really exciting private sector opportunities as well.
Is there another example on the other side of a company you backed early that you thought was on the precipice of a big inflection point, and it was like a false summit? It wasn't there. It took longer, or maybe it never came at all. And I'm just, like, this is a big thing for us at Massive, is we like to really underwrite those moments where you're starting to see market pull and you're really investing in execution, not ideas anymore. And it comes at different times for different companies. And sometimes it's a head fake, like twice, 3 times until it's real. So I'm just curious if you've had that experience also.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think one of the more interesting ones is actually our portfolio company, Lumia. I referenced a little bit earlier, but they make these wearables that measure blood flow in your brain. And they started out as an inner ear wearable. Like the founder had his father was a veteran, had a chronic fainting condition. He was a great engineer, and he wanted to build something that would help people that had chronic dizziness, chronic dysautonomia, long COVID, those types of issues. And he built it, and it worked. But it was very hard to fit because it goes inside your ear canal. And in their first year of sales, they did like $1 million worth of sales. And then the guy called me up and said, the founder, Daniel Lee, he said, we actually, through a series of fortunate accidents, realized it'll work better on the back of your ear, not the front of your ear. And we can make a smart earring stud instead of the device that we have. So we're going to just shelf the thing that we were selling and start all over again and build again for like 6 to 9 months. So that thing that was like making $1 million, we're just not going to sell anymore. Are you okay with that? And my first response was absolutely not. Go to war with the army you have. But we talked about it for a while, and the logic of the massively expanded market by being a smart earring stud instead of a hard to fit form factor did resonate and persevered. And so the very first versions of that new product are actually being rolled out by the end of this month now. And so it's been a journey of supporting the founder through that kind of pivot. Back to the dual use thesis, I think a lot of what actually made that pivot possible was they were doing research with the military, and they were doing really transformative research, but it also allowed for more funding and more runway than they would have had otherwise. And had the military not supported them, they probably would have had to fundraise kind of right into that pivot, as opposed to being able to show that the form factor actually worked.
Super interesting. That's, I love those conversations because, you're kind of caught between two mindsets, right? Like you totally want to back the founder and help them and say, look, you guys know this, we're here to back you. And then you're thinking about your LPs and the conversations you're going to have with them. And being able to get through that is definitely challenging. So glad you were able to support that. It sounds like a good pivot. We hope it turns into a good outcome for them and for you guys. But indicative in that statement is like government budgets are increasing. There's more capital flowing into dual use defense tech. It seems to us, at least, especially coming off the Deep Tech Summit that we hosted a month or so ago, like LPs are all about kind of defense tech and dual use right now. Like you guys are clearly positioned in a good place, but like, is that like huge new flow of LPs interested in this stuff that many of whom don't have runtime in these areas? Is that good for the ecosystem? Is that hard for you guys? Does it create problems? Or are you just running around picking up change off the sidewalks everywhere you can and it's filling your pockets? Like how do you feel about that, the trend there?
Yeah. And first, the Deep Tech Summit was fantastic, by the way. So I thought you guys, it was a great experience. Really glad that I was able to join.
Love having you.
About it.
You are always welcome.
Excellent. But I think in terms of, it's always hard, whenever you're kind of caught in a bubble, for lack of a better term, right? There are ways to be huge winners in it, and there's ways to be huge losers in it, right? Like if you are just throwing darts at a board at internet stocks in 1993, you're probably feeling pretty good. If you're doing it in 1999, you're probably feeling less good. And so, and so there's a lot of companies that have. When we first got started, people would not value government contracts at more than 1x revenue, right? Whereas you would value a software ARR at 20x revenue.
Yeah.
now people are looking at, government contracts and valuing them more in that ARR, maybe not 20x, but maybe 5, maybe 10, 15x. And at some level that makes sense because the defense budget is actually growing so quickly that you can continue to grow at those venture level scales with the military. But there really is a question of how long will that last? And I think as long as you don't convince yourself that the party's never going to stop, I think there's still opportunities to be thoughtful and take advantage of the fact that there are these huge tailwinds without just agreeing that every defense startup starting at the PowerPoint level is worth $1 billion and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, and there's the LP capital, right? Defense dual use deep tech is obviously a thing. The money flows through markets, right? You see stuff flow through growth to blue chips from industrials. There's always flow, and money needs to move. And so when SaaS multiples get compressed because of AI disruption, people look for the places where there's the greatest value expansion, even if they don't understand the market. And so we're seeing some of that now. It's going to happen at the LP level, the GP level, right? Somebody that was running a crypto fund 4 years ago is now a deep tech investor, right? So, and we've seen that. And eventually it get, the sort of the tourists leave and the people that are in it for the long haul stay. One of the extra challenges with defense, dual use, and deep tech is because a lot of the product demand, innovation, sort of call for papers, if you will, that comes out of all the things we've already talked about does come from the government. How do you guys think about investing through, not just through the cycle and the bubble and dealing with the valuation problems, but admin changes, budget changes? Like we all saw what happened when the admin changed and Doge showed up and budgets got frozen, right? And since you guys have been doing this for a long time and you're going to be doing it for a long time into the future, how much sleep do you guys lose worrying about those transitions or priorities changing? Or let's say the next administration is Democratic and they're like, we're never going to war again.
Right. I think the thing that's unique about the defense tech ecosystem, and especially the part that is non-weapon specifically, is that those budgets never really go down. And there's kind of this magical confluence of, because it is both for national security and both fundamental research and development supporting small businesses, like kind of regardless of where you land on the political spectrum, you tend to be in favor of that type of spending, even if you disagree on the mechanism. Like you might rather have a little bit more money for missiles and a little bit less for fundamental science that gives you better missiles, but you're kind of fine with it. Or you might say, hey, I wish the National Science Foundation was spending this money, but it's still going to the kinds of things that I'd want to support. And so there really aren't examples in US history where this type of spending has been materially slashed or gone down as far back as we've ever been able to look.
David, it's interesting. The way that we talk about that is investing in inevitable markets.
Yeah. Yep.
And that durability of, we're not going to quit investing in this thing because our future and humanity requires it, is a big thing for us. And so the way you articulated that is fantastic from a different lens.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And by the way, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I think there's just also in national security in particular, there's a lot of momentum that transcends administrations, right? So, Trump put tariffs in his first term, and Biden spoke out against them, but kept them, right? And so it wasn't like we actually keep kind of seesawing back and forth on these national security issues in ways that say renewable energy tends to oscillate quite a bit with administrations.
Yeah, I was just going to say before, if you ever get another line on a well-research funded technology coming out of Google or someone, but at pre-seed prices, you know where to reach us.
Absolutely.
So let's not pass up on that opportunity. So, one of the things, and we mentioned before you came out for the Deep Tech Summit here in Golden, Colorado a few months ago, and one of the things that Ari and I struggle with is actually being based here in Colorado. People tend to label us as regional investors, even though we're very much not, right? We're international investors. We go wherever the business and technology is. We just like being here in Boulder. We think it's a great place to live. But a lot of people from the other coast, really perceive this kind of like flyover country for a long time, right? I'm curious, I know you've got at least one local position. How are you thinking about from a dual use, deep tech, aerospace and defense perspective, like, do you see this as a real kind of growing tech hub? Do you think it's wannabe? You still think it's a regional ambition looking for a reason to exist, or do you think there's a real ecosystem here?
I think there's definitely a real ecosystem. It may not be as large as the Bay Area, certainly, or even Boston, but you have a lot of great resources. Boulder has always been a great software startup hub. Right, NIST is in Boulder. You have in Colorado Springs, you have the Air Force Academy, and so there's a nice confluence of kind of tech and telecom and space that really does, and you have the types of people and types of entrepreneurial founders from that ecosystem that really allow you to grow and create innovative startups. And I think the key for any ecosystem is to focus on what it's good at and not try to create the next B2B software boom when that's clearly going to be in the Bay, or the next biotech boom when that's going to be in Boston. But focus on things like autonomy and space and areas where you can really spike.
We don't disagree, but good to hear it. Good to hear it from a coastal investor that's spent some time here. So,
what have you coastal dude?
Well, and to your point, though, I think all good investors are hunters, not gatherers, right? The idea that, this is a great founder, but I got to get on a plane to see them. I can't imagine any venture fund existing for very long that's good that has that mindset.
Very cool.
So, okay, for going further down this line, if you had to pick one place where you were going to go build a deep tech company, and I gave you two choices, Boston or Boulder, what are you going to do?
I think it's a little tough for a guy who lives in Boston, but I come back to one of my favorite ridiculous business sayings is you have to fish where the fish are, which I always thought, why would you say that? But it really is true, right? If you want to build a really innovative robotics company, I think you probably want to be in Boston. If you want to build a quantum technology company, then you should be in Boulder or Albuquerque, right? Like that. Those are places that really spike on those dimensions. And so I think you just have to be able to immerse yourself in the ecosystem that is best for you as a founder.
Yep.
That's cool. Well, this has been a really interesting and enjoyable conversation, Jon. We really appreciate you being here. We're going to kind of slowly wrap up here, and the way we do that is what we call rapid fire, right?
Okay.
So we're just going to hit you with a couple of kind of interesting, quick questions, trying to get your immediate reactions, and I'll let Ari kick it off.
All right, perfect. Home stretch here, buddy. Okay, so the one sector that's in deep tech that you think is overfunded beyond what the actual technology or market could support, what sort of like peak hype cycle in deep tech right now?
Definitely LLMs. $1 trillion going into that whole field. My personal belief of how this whole story ends is that we spent so much money on physical infrastructure, and the physical infrastructure is to power these large language models. But in the history of computer science, everything gets like hundreds to thousands to millions of times more efficient over time. And so we are going to have capacity that is for something that now requires 1/1,000,000th of the power, and have massively overbuilt for it. So that's my prediction for how that cycle ends.
Awesome. All right. So one of the biggest founder red flags that you think most investors miss because maybe they're good at pitching and they got a cool technology.
My favorite founder red flag is when they try to get you to invest right before an inflection point, right? And it always feels like this crazy Middle Eastern marketplace where they're like, if you just invest at the low price now, and but in 3 weeks we're going to get a massive contract, and then you should just come, then you'll get this massive inflection with us. And I was like, but you know a lot more about your business than I know about your business. So why are you giving me this great deal? As much as I like you in the last 15 minutes where I first met you, and you just and you see this all the time where people are trying to raise because they will convince you to that they will have a huge spike in their value in a very short period of time.
Okay, next one. Biggest thing that traditional or software VCs miss when looking at dual use or deep tech companies?
I think a lot of them don't know how to evaluate what the military signals are, right? And not all SBIRs are created equal. There are lots of different contracting vehicles. the biggest one actually I see is the IDIQ, where it literally stands for indefinite quantity. Like you don't know how much money you're going to get out of this, and it can frequently be zero. And so it's a cap. The numbers are really, really big. And so people say, hey, I got a $100 million IDIQ, and they may get $0 out of it in the future.
Awesome. All right, last one, and then we're going to wrap up. All right, administration changes. We're not going to war anymore. Government funding kind of dries up on the weapons and defense tech stuff, which I know you're not investing in weapons in anyway. What's the key technology that J2 is digging into for the future when that occurs?
I think the government will always care about telecom. It will always care about cybersecurity.
Wow, you're gonna.
I don't think even when we're not at war, I think these are things that people care about. So we're very bullish on all of them. But by the time that we are no longer at war, I'm quite sure that quantum computing will be a massive technology. So by then, I think that's where the future will be.
I would just like to state for the record that we did not pay Jon to say that.
What's that?
Say it again. All right.
I hear someone's dog.
No, that's my dog's barking. I apologize.
Okay.
All good.
Yeah. By the way, we totally agree with you on quantum, and we should. Mark. All right, go back. By the way, we totally agree with you on quantum. Welcome some time together to go deeper. As already mentioned, we look at it a bunch and have some interesting opportunities. So happy to share with you guys. Jon, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate this conversation. We always have a good time talking to Alex. Really glad we've had some good real reasons to interact, and looking forward to much more in the future.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the time, and thank you both for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to Massive Signals. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, and share the episode with someone who cares about the future of deep tech. And subscribe to our Substack at massive.vc to stay in the loop on all of our current investments, thinking, as well as upcoming events like our quarterly Deep Tech Table dinners. Find it all at massive.vc. Until next time, keep listening for the signals that are shaping our future world.